Welcome and thank you for joining me on the dp2 micro learning program on featured in Star Composites. Spend a little bit of time in PowerPoint just to kind of give you the overview of kind of what we're looking at, and then I'll switch over to dp2. So featured in Star Composites, as you know, this is the third in the series. There's another one last piece that will be focused strictly on the composite job generator that I believe Kathy's conducting tomorrow. And that will focus on some of the mechanics of the composite job generator in more detail. I will actually be kind of starting there. A featured Star Composite, as I'm sure you know, is the composite that features one child. And instead of having one composite that is the same for a certain number of data records, in this case we have a unique composite for each individual child or dance star or soccer player or church directory, whatever it is. You can kind of use this in many different ways. Just a couple of things that I want to highlight before we get into DP2. Featured or Star Composites, in this case I'm going to talk about them and demonstrate them without a predefined pattern. And really this is about kind of reinforcing that anything you could do with a pattern, you can do here a little bit better. And it uses and leverages the same great features that we introduced for regular composites. A couple of things of note: the featured nodes are fixed countable nodes, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in the behavior. But it's important in this case to differentiate that the fixed nodes don't change size in relationship to the other countable nodes, which is something that we did do, or you can continue to do if you want. In a composite layout that leverages a pattern. But the composite job generator features remain the same. So let's take a look at dp2. So as I said, we're going to be looking at a featured composite in terms of the composite job generator first, and I'll kind of work my way back. This is a sample featured composite that I built to kind of demonstrate what's happening. This is based on that sample order that's new inside of dp2. And I'm going to show you kind of how I got there. We'll start, I think what Kathy says, right, is we'll start where we're going so you have a picture of what we're doing. I'm going to take a look first at the shoot description data table, and I'll go to composites from here. I know that I reinforced last time that you could do this from order data, but I'm going to kind of work at that higher level, assuming that you've got multiple orders and classes and other things, shoots and retake days inside of kind of the scenario that we're running. So from the composite job generator, the one that I used to create this composite that we're looking at here, I want to talk a little bit about and reinforce some of the kind of fundamentals of running a Star Composite in dp2, so that if you're not familiar, you have that as a setup, and if you did it a long time ago, it's a good reminder, and if you're doing it today, it's still a good reminder. I have a saved job setup that I used, and I'm sure that Kathy will include kind of some of these things because I don't want to really have to go through the process of building it at this point. I do want to go through the process of showing it to you. So my node details in this case, and I'm going to actually go ahead and load my job setup that I have here. And here are the node details that I use to build a composite that you see here on the left. And there's nothing special about the node details. There's really nothing different. A couple of things to note about what I did here, some of the thinking that goes with the featured layout, is that my featured composite actually has a different style that allows me to have the font for the child that's featured to manage the size differently than I'm managing the size for the countable nodes that are going to be consistent in size. It'll all be the same, and that'll be rotating the child in and out. And that was simply a matter of creating a second style that allowed me to be able to do that from in here. The piece that's different that I want to highlight is that once I select the type of a composite to be featured, I have to make some choices. And the way in which I make those choices is important. And I know a lot of folks, then when the first time they try to create featured composites, they get here and go, what is that? but there's some choices, and we want you to be able to make those choices right here in the groups window so that you can access the data that you need to, and I'm going to show you that right now. So once I've chosen it, I have to decide, is it all the students, which is the choice I made for this particular one? Is it all students and staff, or is it some students and some staff? And what these represent is just basically filters. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tell dp2 in your subject info data, where are those filters, right? So I chose all students. It makes a good example. I actually have, you can see here, two restrictions in number 6. I'm going to go back and build this, but I want to show you what I did because I don't want the teachers and I don't want the principal. So what I did is I went here, which subject field identifies the staff members. And if we go back to the node details, I'm using the basic ones that were built with the order, which is the teacher and the homeroom, in order to build the teacher and the principal and get the right image in the right place. So I'm going to take that information, and for homeroom, what happens when you select one of these fields is that down below, it shows me all the values that are in that field. So for homeroom, I have the homeroom numbers, right? And I have principal, which is what I wanted. And I started with, and I'm going to kind of show you this, I actually started with the teacher. And the teacher shows me the 3 teacher names and then shows me the P or the T. So what I simply did was I selected it and then I clicked on it, right? And I just simply said, and so it gives me that restriction that says, don't put any teachers in that featured node, right? Skip over them. The same thing was true for the principal. I just added the and, I selected and, could have been or, and I said, don't put don't use that, put that image in a featured composite that has a principal in the homeroom field. And although I could have done it both in the teacher field, because I do have that data, I wanted to do 2 so that you could get a feel for how this works. That's really the only difference, is that we give you this opportunity to say, who gets these? Is it just the teacher, or is it just the students, or is it a combination? And depending on what data you have in which field, and this will show you all the fields in your subject data table. So depending on how many fields you have and what's in there, and allow you then to build that restriction around who does not get them, right? Our going in assumption is everybody gets them, and then you have to tell us who doesn't. So that's really the difference. And this is how we get from I have the layout to I actually have the job. And then one of the other major differences is that if you're doing regular composites today, what happens is that when you generate these, you of course get one of each because there's one that's unique to each child. So that's kind of an overview, and I'll come back to this as we do this, but I wanted to just give you the big picture of where we're going. And I'm going to close the composite job generator, and I'm going to take a look at these layouts. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I have going here, and we'll look at these, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'll begin to build them. What's happening here is I have 3 basically fixed set of nodes, and it's important because it's kind of building on the 2 things that Kathy and I have already done. One is kind of a standard regular composite. Kathy added that staff row feature. And so the staff row feature is essentially this, what we call an enclosing node, is fixed. It's fixed in position and it's fixed in relative size. I'll explain that as I build a new one. I have a text, in this case I have a title block that's got, in the composite job generator I had macros for the teacher's name, for the school name, and for the grade that all got pulled out of that same subject info data table. And then we have the featured node. In the past, with a composite layout for featured composites that used a pattern, you would select the node in the pattern or a group of nodes if you wanted to be bigger, that would be that featured node. And because they remain countable nodes, as you worked on your pattern, the featured node had a relationship with the rest of the nodes as a part of the pattern. And that's not the case using the composite layout helper. I think it's a real advantage here because it gives you much more control over what's happening. So, and I'll go ahead and open up the layout. As you can see, I have a number of these, and I'm, you know, if you're familiar with Star, there's one thing I do want to show you. This is the Kathy mentioned it in her piece that she did last week, that one of the fixes between this version and the version that will be out soon is that because I had macros for these two nodes in my composite job generator, it populated them, and so they're showing. All I need to do is to say, you know, not show the hidden nodes. dp2 is then, those are hidden, which is a part of that staff row. dp2 is going to center that staff exactly where I had it selected, and I just want to give you the heads up because as we build these, you'll see it in what I'm doing, but you're not going to see it going forward. So each one of these is unique. I'm using styles. I actually put the background in the composite itself when I built it into the layout. I put the output specification in this case, as you may have noticed, in the composite job generator, so it's not here as part of the layout. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll just open this up as a completed one, and then I'm going to review a couple of things in here. And I'll just start somewhere in the middle. I actually have a set that goes from 7 to 55. My number, this number was just kind of an average of the kinds of things I've seen in different labs. So your range will be whatever you build and whatever you need. I'm going to open up this one. So this is layout 35. And I'm going to right click and go to Layout Helper, Composites, Edit, just so that you can get a feel for, you know, how I built this. And then I'm going to go back and create a new one. And as I said, one of the other things that, you know, I'll just remind you, right, here's my margins, my countable node margins. And it's important that even though in this case my featured node is still a countable node, it actually can be moved because it's also a fixed node. I can move it really kind of wherever I want it to be in my template. And as Kathy explained last week, you know, that ability to, you know, select the background, and here's my staff row. And each one of my staff row, let me make this a little bit smaller so we can see both at the same time. You know, each one of my the hidden nodes, or depending on whether or not I have, if that's being populated, I have these set up in my staff row as being centered, which is why when we looked at that other one, and it's going to resize, you know, the row and the nodes based on the repositioning when I'm, you know, either adding or subtracting nodes, depending on, you know, whether I'm at 55 or at 10. The featured node, which I select and I make it a featured node here, right? There's a button right here that says make it a featured node, which also makes it, although it makes it a fixed size node, it remains a countable node, which is a little different than staff row and a little bit different than your regular countable nodes. The other button that I do want to point out, and I'll be showing you, I'm sure, is that I don't believe I might have, you know, showed it to you, but I really didn't do anything with it. The first one was this Resized Text Box. So as I go through and I'm building a set of featured nodes, I will resize this intentionally because there is that relationship between the image and the text node. And when you first resize the image node, it doesn't automatically resize the text box. So we have a way for you to do that. So those are really the elements. And I put a title block in all of them. I'm going to do that in the one I'm building for you, so that we can kind of go through the process. There's a couple of things that I want to highlight because I have so much, I'm going to say, fixed material to deal with here. There's a couple of things, kind of an approach that I want to take to this, that when we were doing a regular composite, I would say, hey, start at the bottom, start at the top, start in the middle, start wherever you want. And we've got a couple of caveats when it comes to the variety of things that we're looking at here. So that's really kind of what I'm going to go through. and show you. So, as we go through, I'm going to use the same steps, essentially, that I used last time to kind of go back and forth and to build. But I'm actually going to start from a lower number, and I'll explain why when I get there. I'm still going to use the automation tools, the Manage tab, in order to be able to build lots of layouts at the same time so I don't have to do everything manually. But I'm going to take a slightly different approach. And the reason I'm going to do that is because the staff node, that enclosing node for staff row, it sizes down, but it doesn't size up as gracefully. It really doesn't. You can't get bigger. So if you were working at a high number of countable nodes and working your way down, could get to a point where your staff node wouldn't resize, and that might be fine. You might be perfectly okay with having, and there are definitely cases where you'd want to do that, where the staff row remains in one place and stays the same size, even though the kids, or whatever it is that's the subject of your composite layout, might be getting bigger. Same thing is true with the fixed node. So if you had, for the featured, you started at, 500, you might want your featured node to be a different size when you got down to 10. So that's kind of the process that I'm going to go through, which is why I'm going to take a slightly different approach. So I'm going to close this, and we're going to start to make a new one. I don't need that anymore anyway. So I'm not going to make a huge range just because, obviously you're not going to need to see me go on and on and on, but I am going to do a big enough range that hopefully I'll run into definitely I'll run into the things I'm trying to demonstrate. So new composite product, create without predefined patterns, and I'm actually going to leave it at the default of 10. I think I will probably I'll just make it a 10 by 8, and I'll call it training feature comp. Doesn't really, obviously the naming of these and what category they're in is really up to you and your housekeeping. I'm going to go ahead and create it. And it's going to open up the composite layout and the product images. I'm just going to close the product images. I'm not going to put a background in here now. But I'm actually going to start from the least of what I need. So I'm going to add some of those fixed nodes that I want to have in here. So as an example, maybe I have 5 that need to be in a staff row. So I'm going to create staff row right away. So now I have the pretty good size. I'm also going to, I think I'll create a featured node, and I'm actually going to resize this a little bit later on in the process. So I'm going to go ahead and make this my featured node. Right, and it tells you node 1 is the featured node, and it automatically names it. Right, so notice that in the custom name nodes. So if I want to, now name the nodes that are in my staff row, I can do that right now. I mean, all of these things remain exactly the same. It's just now beginning to decide how that featured node is going to behave. So I'll call this. I'm just going to give those values. So now I have what's in the staff row is non-countable, and you can see that when you look at all the nodes, right? So here's the enclosing node for my staff row is node 10,000. The featured node is named, and then each one of these nodes is named. So now I currently only have really 5 countable nodes, and you can see that at the top here, this is automatically giving me what I want. But maybe I don't want to start at 5. Maybe I really do want to start at 10. So I'm going to go ahead and just add some, and then we'll do some repositioning and kind of give you a sense of it. And you'll notice now, because I'm moving down in size, that everything's kind of doing what I need it to do. I'm going to actually bring this back up to 10. So I'm going to just go ahead and add And you'll notice again, my staff row is still running across the top. My featured node is where I need it to be. So now I'm at 8. I'm not really sure, 9 countable nodes, including that child. And I'm going to add that last one. Now there's a couple of other things that can come into play here. So the first thing I might do is move that featured node. And again, moving nodes is the same here as it is for any other kind of layout. There's nothing different or special about the toolbar or how you would use the toolbar in this context. Some of the same things that we've always experienced. And you'll notice too that at this point I can kind of, it's using the margins the way that dp2 does, and we can go back and I've got the bottom margin is in 1/2 inch. I'm not sure if I'm going to leave that the way it is or not, but I'm going to add that last node. So now I'm starting at, it's got 11 countable nodes, including that featured node. And is this the way, depending on your lab, you can also then just delete these, right? So if you were to use the delete key, it's going to automatically refresh the way that you would want it to. It's these relationships and tucking things around, and there's a couple of other things that I do want to show you about managing with these fixed nodes, because of course I still have not added my title node. So I'm going to need to kind of figure out where I want that to go. So I think I'll draw that now so that I kind of have an idea of how I want this to look when I'm done with it. And I'll create that title node, and I'm just going to say, create text node. I'm not going to add the image. I could add an image node here. You're free to do whatever you need to do, including, if you are generating other order items that have data in them and you want to use post-process, which I think will be part of Kathy's demonstration tomorrow. Or you can, there's some of those are about putting, if you're generating order items that have logos and data and all kinds of other things, very complex title or image boxes that you need to generate for your customers, and you're generating them outside the composites, you can always create a composite that will allow you to do that. So I'm just going to call this title box so it's easier to read. And I'm going to leave that alone, but now I'm going to hit reposition. And now I need to get a feel for, okay, where am I? And what do I want to resize, and how do I want it to work? Do I want to have my enclosed node for the staff go all the way across the top? Do I need to shift this around? Right? These are the kinds of choices that you'll be making when it comes to working down at this size with this type of node, because right now our static nodes are greater in number or greater in scope, depending on how you look at it, right? Might make that a little bit smaller. And I'm going to reposition again. Well, it didn't do what I wanted to do. So I'm going to keep working, and I want to see where that's going to, how I can get that to work differently. So as an example, maybe I'm going to actually reposition this a little bit. I'm going to just see what happens. That's really kind of what I'm doing right now, is manipulating this, experimenting with it so that you can see, get a feel for how this behaves. And I'm going to resize a couple of things so I can use those other tools. But I'm going to make this a placeholder. And one of the things to note, I got a big change right away. I think I said this the last time, but I really wanted to demonstrate what's happening here is this actually becomes, when you make a placeholder, this really small node with a very small padding around it. Oops, try doing that with the move tool there. And just I'll move it up here so that I kind of know where it is. So now maybe I like that, maybe I don't. Maybe I want to shift the margins around. Maybe I want to make this a placeholder too, so I have a better relationship top to bottom. Right, and that's going to allow me, I might be happier with that. At this point, to notice that the text or the staff node is changing size with my image nodes. And of course, I think I've said it a number of times now, but the featured node is not. And I could decide that I wanted it to be greater or smaller. But I think I'm going to leave this alone now just as an example. And what I'm going to do is create some of the other things I need. because I now have basically my nodes. I have all of my custom node names for my composite job generator, but I need to kind of build the rest of my collection. And that's kind of the next step. Now, I started lower because I want to be able to better manage this featured node. And as I said, on that first piece overall, it doesn't really matter. When you're working on a regular composite, you don't have quite as many elements to deal with. Or you might, but this is one way, because you can put kind of anything you need anywhere. I'm going to leave this alone, and I am going to save it. I'll use the file menu to save it. That won't be consistent. I'll be saving it in a number of different places. But now what I want to do is use the basics of this. One thing I am going to do, I do have, I can require an output spec here, and I actually am going to do it that way just to kind of reinforce another way to do it. Beyond doing it in the beginning, really, it's going to depend on, I'm going to use a small one too. It's going to depend on where your lab likes to do these things. If you're currently doing in the composite job generator, whatever you set up in that composite job setup is what's going to rule the day, right? It's a case where the composite job generator was designed specific to being able to do that. So now I'm going to, in this scenario, in this example, I'm going to leave 10 as my smallest. But what I want to do is I'm going to create maybe 11 to 15 and see where I'm at. And see kind of what happens to both the staff row. Do I want to change the size of the staff row? Do I want there to be kids up on that first row? But for this particular one, I'm going to leave this the way it is, and I'm not going to try to do that. But I'm going to create, one other thing, and not because I do this constantly, and I know that you guys will probably have the same, right? I'm so used to clicking buttons before I read them. But it's kind of important in this context to, especially as you're getting used to this new tool, to kind of read the buttons, because the guys were really good about trying to make sure that the buttons were sort of self-explanatory. So in this case, create from selected layout, I would have had to select it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create those. And of course, dp2, I think I'll just undo that, didn't I? Oh, I know what I didn't do. All right, I am going to actually go back to that. So I got the warning because I forgot to apply to the selected layout. And as I'm pretty sure I said in the first piece, right, when we're working on the manage and the duplicate tabs, we are working on, and saving back to disk. So I have to kind of apply it to that layout. dp2 kind of saves it in the background, if you will. It's loosely saying. And now it's going to allow me to override them. I could have deselected that, but I wanted to kind of make the point here, which is why I went back. So I'm going to create them in dp2, again, status bar. And let's take a look at 11. Now, just to reinforce one of the other concepts, we said it a couple of times, one layout helper. There's a couple of different ways to work outside of that paradigm. I can, of course, close this one and start all over again. I can go to the Nodes tab and I can use Previous, which is now going to open up, because I was on 10, it opened up 15. Because the way that it works, right, it's opening the next one, essentially. So we're at 15, and now I really, I can take a look at, well, how do I want this to work? What do I want to play with? Do I want there to be, kids up in that top row? And this is a case as well where I can change this. Now I have to also, you'll notice, and I'm going to explain what's happening here. I know Kathy did cover this, and I'll reinforce it, because I have the staff row set up over here. I have horizontal justification at centered, and I have selected, which is the default, to resize the staff row and nodes during repositioning. So if I wanted to make sure that maybe I had a couple of kids up here and then hit reposition, dp2 is going to do that automatically for me. And as I think what will happen is when we're actually running these, I have to make sure I get the right numbers in here, right? So that I have the right number of kids for my composite. I'm not going to change yet the size of this featured node. I'm not going to spend too much time kind of manipulating this one, but I do want to point out that I want to see my placeholders. Do I want to leave the placeholders where they are? Do I want a kid? I can just use the delete button and try to reposition. Do I have enough room to get one over here? Do I really want one? Those are the types of decisions that you can make as you go. I'm actually going to undo that one, and I'm going to leave this the way it is. So, and I'm going to save it. Now I'll leave the kid the way it is. And again, I'm not making this a really complex layout, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time tweaking on it. But I'm just going to save it. And then I'm going to take a look at the next one. And, you know, once I gain some confidence about how I want to do this, you know, I'm looking at this one. And I think what I'm actually going to do is go to the previous one to just take a quick look so that I have a sense of what's, and I think I actually, for the ones that are this size, and I'm doing it this way because I want to kind of point out really, once as you're previewing these and kind of taking a look at them, I'm actually going to go back to manage. I'm going to go back to 15. I'm going to open it just 10% so I can take a look at it, which is where I made these changes. I'm going to close it because I didn't do anything to it, but I'm going to overwrite 12, 13, and 14 based on the changes I made on 15. I didn't take a look at 11, but I will in a minute. Or not, you know. But I'm going to overwrite 12 and 14 just because I want to make that. I don't want to have to go back through and do everything to every single one. I want to be able to kind of use what I'm learning and what's happening. And so this is essentially how I can build my set. And I actually think I'm going to, you know, I'm going to overwrite 11. I'm just going to do 11 to 11. And I'll create from the selected layout. And I'll just refresh this one. I'm going to open it up again, or just, I think I'll just refresh it. Oops. There we go. I guess I should have saved it better, huh? All right, we'll open it up again. I'm going to just open up 11. There we go. I'll open up 11. And now there's some things I want to do, and that's kind of why I did it, but I didn't want to refresh quite as quickly as I would have liked. So now here I'm at 11. I have a kind of a pretty good memory of what I did in 10 and how do I want this to work? Where do I want things to happen? Because again, I can use placeholders, right? I can do a number of different things to shift this around. You know, maybe that kind of works for 11. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then I can just take a quick look at 12. Yep, 12 is good. So now what I'm going to do is go back to manage. And the reason, again, that I'm doing this is there'll come a point where I do want my staff row to size up or down, in this case, with my countable nodes. But there will come a point where maybe I want to maneuver my title box, or maybe I want to play with the size of that featured node. And that's really the point in time where you know, you're going to want to really think about how does it happen and how do you move it around and what choices do you want to make. So I'm going to create a bunch more just because I want to exceed that. I want to have a point at which, yeah, maybe these are too small and that's too big. So I'm going to create 16 through 35. And again, your range obviously is going to be based on, you know, the needs of a particular school or dance club or sports team, whatever it is. And you can see dp2 is real busy. And I'm going to come up to one that I'm hoping it'll show a more dramatic difference in the size of the featured node as it does for the regular countable nodes. So let's go ahead and open up 24, and it does. So now here's the kind of the key to where we're going. Now we can really maneuver and move. So I'm going to, in my mind, I need to make the featured node a little bit smaller. So I'm going to use the normal, you know, resize tool, and I'm going to bring this down in size. And this is, it might not be quite the same aspect ratio, but it's close. I would, now, I can, and I would, if I were doing this for production, go up and check the size in coordinates. I'd look at how big is it, what am I trying to do here? How big do I want it to be? And maybe I'd make it 1.5 by 2 or whatever it is. But all of the tools that you have access to in other places you can use in this context. So now I'm going to move it. And you'll notice, of course, that the text box is a little wonky, or it looks a little wonky. It really isn't, because I'm simply going to say Resized Text Box. And, oops, let me change that. There we go. And now resize the text box. Uh-oh. Oh, I know why. Okay. So there you go, right? This is something that will happen. So I'm working on here the countable nodes 13, but what I really want to be doing is working on 24. So I'm going to go over to manage, and I'm going to open up edit, and that will bring me to the edit for that layout helper. Actually, that was good, even though I didn't want to do that, nor intended. So now I'm going to resize that text box. There it goes, tucks itself right back up. In this case, I'm not going to worry too much about resizing the staff row because I've already demonstrated it, but I could. I'm going to move the title box. Do I want it to be this big? Do I want to make it smaller? These are really the choices. I might make it small enough that I can fit a row underneath it, which gave me some other real estate. So let's reposition it and see what we've got. And it does, and that's really kind of what I was after, because now I can shift this down a little bit. Maybe I'm going to move it over here. I can use that, center horizontally and see where the center is. I can now move my featured node, and I can use all those other tools. I can say, what, I want these to be the same height. And which one? I want this to be the same. And because these same things work, right? I'm going to align those. I can use align nodes here. I'm going to align those left edges because it's still a node. So all of those things work. And then I'm going to hit reposition and see what I gained. I may not, it didn't really do that much. So what else do I want to do? Is this okay? Do I want to make this a placeholder maybe? So that I've got a couple of students up here. Do I really want them? Those are the types of decisions then that you can make, and you've got all these wonderful tools to be able to make them with. And that's really, and then of course you can save it and move down. But in a case like this, the only things that you might want to change size and so on would be that featured node, depending on how, or not. You might leave the featured node the same size for all of them, and then just allow the staff row to change size, and to get smaller as you're working your way up and building your new layout. And that's the essence of it. That it really is. It's the ability to kind of understand how all of these things are going to work together, and the types of choices that you might make. And I can play around with it because it's really, your ability to undo it. As you saw before, dp2 is going to show you when it can't. And maybe you want to center this. Maybe let's see if we get rid of that. Right? And I'm just using the delete key, and we center that, right? What will happen, right? It takes the whole thing with it, and remembering that I can, in the staff row, when I'm here, I could actually make it, left justified, so that, especially if I had more, if maybe I had another couple of staff, or it was the staff row was equal to the size of the number of nodes, which if you're selecting nodes, it might be, I manipulated this a little bit as I went just to kind of show you what that's going to look like and how it's going to operate. And again, reminding, use the set values buttons, use all of those other tools that you have at your disposal. I want to thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon to kind of take a look at, or a new look at, featured composites. So thank you, and I hope you have a great day.